Hi, I'm Terry Murphy, Senior Executive Editor for Realty Times Women in Business and Women in Real Estate. We have a special guest with us today. She's one of the rare women that have been dominating in the field of real estate compliance. Summer Goralik is an impressive background with being a real estate broker and instructor for Escrow Training Institute, 6 years as an investigator for the DRE. Welcome, Summer.
Hi, Terry. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And besides the fact that she's smart as she can be and gorgeous, this woman has the amazing ability to be in compliance, which there are very few women in, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And so I don't know how you got there, but I know you've worked with some pretty impressive people. But why don't you tell everybody that's listening or watching to this what DRE actually stands for?
That would be the Department of Real Estate.
Aha. That's when you never want to see anything except your license or renewal, right?
Absolutely.
So as a real estate compliance consultant, you help licensees actually evaluate their regulatory compliance or to correct those non-compliant things. And it's so easy to make a mistake today because with the internet and that all being relatively new, I bet that's a pretty big challenge. What are you seeing as the biggest mistake most brokers are making when it comes to compliance?
Oh, well, there are a lot of mistakes, unfortunately, but one of the biggest would have to be in the area of trust fund handling.
Trust fund is not just like you got lucky and your parents were the Swifts or the Armors, but trust fund as in broker escrow account, correct?
Sure, it could be a broker handling trust funds in the course of escrow activities, or property management is probably the number one on the list.
I would also say to you, you gave us a list of 10. And so I'd like to go through a couple of them. First of all is keeping DRE informed. Now, is that just like address changes? What does that mean?
Yeah, it sounds boring, Terry, but everything counts. Details matter. So if your mailing address, office address, your phone numbers, your email addresses, anything that you're required to be reporting to the Department of Real Estate, you have to notify them of any changes within 30 days. And I realize that's kind of annoying, but it's also pretty easy to do, and it keeps them outside of your doors. Also, if a broker were to terminate an agent for violation of the real estate law, they actually have to report that information as soon as possible to the Department of Real Estate with a statement of facts. Another scenario that would require reporting is if a broker changes their main office address or their branch office address. They actually have to report that information by the next business day. That's one I see all of the time, mostly because brokers are not aware of that requirement, quite frankly, and there is a very short time frame. Mind you, you're not going to lose your license over these things, but they're very common violations. And when the DRE does go into your office and check things out, they're going to mark off their list of things that weren't done.
And we want to be sure everybody on this call gets all the right check marks. And I really appreciate that. Also, one of the things you just said something about changing email addresses. Now, if I'm the broker and I have 5 agents and they have different email addresses, is that what you're saying? That I have to keep you informed?
So a broker should have policies and education and information out there for their agents so that their agents know that they have to report this information within 30 days. Brokers also have to report those changes for their own personal information. But if I were the responsible broker, I would make sure that agents were aware of this requirement.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy, and I'm here with Summer Goralik. Oh, start again. Sorry. Hi, I'm Terry Murphy, Senior Editor with Realty Times. I'm here with Summer Goralik, and she is telling us, as a consultant for the Department of Real Estate regulation, what we need to know as brokers. And one of the most important ones is in your list of top 10 was avoid unlicensed, fictitious business names. Now, what do you mean by that?
I know, it's a long word there. And what the heck does that mean? Well, basically, when a broker or an agent out there in the real estate industry, you can only use or advertise names that appear on your license certificate. So if those names don't exist, then guess what? You can't use them unless you go through the process of registering the fictitious business name statement with the county recorder's office and then registering it with the DRE for licensure. And believe it or not, there's a lot of little nuances that you wouldn't even expect to be an unlicensed fictitious business name. I'll give you an example. I think it's telling. If my company, my brokerage is Summer Goralik Realty Inc., and I decide I'm just going to drop the Inc., the INC, If I do that, I'm actually using an unlicensed fictitious business name unless that name variation shows up on my license certificate. And then of course, anytime a broker abbreviates a name, maybe just uses initials, these are all changes that probably don't reflect on your license certificate and would warrant the filing of a licensed fictitious business name. Also, brokers have to be regulating this within their firms. So it's very easy, maybe to regulate 5 agents, but if you have 50 and those agents are not aware of those requirements, you can imagine the number of unlicensed DBAs that could be out there. And all you have to do is look at DRE's disciplinary actions on their website, and you can see that it almost always in an accusation, someone has been, committed this violation for using an unlicensed DBA.
I would think it might be specifically interesting if you have teams. Talk to us a little bit about team names and how that can affect compliance.
So team names are a thorn in my side, and also in the Department of Real Estate side. So a team name is basically a professional identity or brand name that 2 or more licensees use when they advertise themselves or when they provide real estate services. A team name is not deemed a fictitious business name, and it's not needing a separate license as long as you follow the rules. And unfortunately, there are several. One is just getting the team name right. So number 1, that team name has to contain the last name of one of the members, period. Secondly, it has to include one of the terms, team, group, or associates. So sure, you can get fancy out there with the team name, but you have to have those elements. Thirdly, you can't represent yourself as a broker. So you could never have in that team name the term real estate broker or brokerage or something to that effect. And the whole reason behind this, Terry, is because DRE does not want a bunch of agents or salespeople pretending to be brokers or working outside the scope of their brokerage. And of course, with the team name comes supervision for brokers. They have to make sure that all of their agents are aware of these requirements. And a tip that I always give my clients is that if you're going to allow your agents to use team names, well, they have to get it right, and they have to come to you first, vet that name, get approval, and then acknowledge what the advertising requirements are in this area, which there are several.
Which brings us to advertising, and we'll save that for another segment. Hi, I'm Terry Murphy with Summer Goralik, and we are here talking to her as a real estate compliance consultant, and she is giving us the overhead on 10 top mistakes most brokers make. And we have just talked about team names and unlicensed fictitious business names, and brings us to how that ties into one of the biggies, which is advertising.
Advertising is everywhere, and it's the quickest way to get in trouble with the Department of Real Estate. Now, granted, you're not going to lose your license, but why do you want the DRE in your door when they didn't have to be? That's what I always say. So when it comes to advertising, let's understand what the rules are. Number 1, a licensee must disclose their name, their DRE license number, and their responsible broker identity, which is a fancy name for who your responsible brokerage is. You could also use a licensed fictitious business name of the brokerage. That has to be everywhere. Emails, advertising, social media, flyers, printouts, whatever you're doing, whatever kind of advertising materials you're putting out into space to solicit consumers, these pieces of information have to be there. Now, there are some little carve-outs there. For example, a team name. If you're using a team name and you're advertising the team name, you must disclose the team name, one of the members of the team, and their DRE license number, along with the responsible broker identity. And I get this question all the time. Oh, where does the corporate brokerage logo have to be? Put it near the team name, because this is what DRE wants to see. A Department of Real Estate is fixated on teams, rightfully so. I understand their perception. They want to make sure that licensees are representing themselves correctly out in the industry. But when you're using a team name, it's very important to get those advertising requirements correct. There's also another carve out when we talk about advertising compliance, and that is for sale signs. For sale, for rent, open house, directional signs. I'll just use a for sale sign, for example. If you look at your for sale sign, and if it just says for sale, which of course they never do, but if they did, you're good, you're cool. If it just said the brokerage name, the licensed brokerage name, you're also fine. But the second you get fancy, you add an agent's name, maybe you add a license number, then all three of those requirements have to be basically displayed on the for sale sign. And there is one last requirement, and this is one that is often forgotten. If you're publishing something in a newspaper or a magazine, or maybe you're distributing something by mail, an advertising piece, you must also disclose your license designation, which would be, I'm a broker, you're an agent. You could also use realtor. If you're a realtor, that will satisfy that requirement.
Well, clearly we need you in navigating advertising rules. Tell us where to go to get some of the checklists to help us not be non-compliant.
So Department of Real Estate is a great place to start. Their website actually has advertising guidelines for licensees, is a real estate form, basically advertising disclosure requirements. They have one for just real estate advertising. They also have one for mortgage loan advertising, which is a whole nother kind of separate world of requirements.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy, and we are delighted to have with us Summer Goralik, and she is a real estate compliance consultant and expert. And we are going through the top 10 mistakes brokers can make without even knowing it. And I think one of the most dangerous, treacherous, or boy, could we get in trouble, is unlicensed assistants. And I'll bet you have something to share with us, Summer.
Oh, if any client I ever hired just never had an unlicensed assistant, I would just be so happy. But of course, that's not the case. Unlicensed assistants, that's what makes the world go round. There's a lot of room for them to help in the real estate sphere. But the problem is there's a very fine line between unlicensed activity and licensed activity. And oftentimes, if a broker's not doing their job with supervising and reviewing and being aware of what those unlicensed people are doing, then there could be a violation there. DRE actually has a very helpful document on their website, and they just recently updated it in the last year and a half, 2 years. It's called Updated Guidelines for Unlicensed Assistants. It's basically a do's and don'ts of what an unlicensed person can do. You read through that and you will see, well, gosh, it doesn't take much, which is why a broker has to be very cautious in this area. And there are situations where brokers allow their agents to have unlicensed assistants. This happens all of the time. And the unlicensed assistant might have a contract with that agent. The broker, the responsible broker, still needs to know what's going on. They still need to have the assurance that there are no activities that are crossing the line. So they have to have policies and procedures in this area. And quite frankly, just education. If that unlicensed person knows what it takes to cross the line, that's half the battle.
And brokers don't realize sometimes, especially if they have really large offices, what some of those unlicensed assistants can be doing. Now, clearly there are some activities, stuffing envelopes, that kind of thing, don't violate some of the compliance rules. But what we're trying to do here is making sure that people who are licensed and educated are practicing real estate and not somebody who's doing ministerial acts. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. So if you have an unlicensed person on a phone call with a consumer, which makes my heart race a little more in my compliance world, and that unlicensed person says, hey, what were you thinking you wanted for your property? How much were you thinking about looking to sell it for?
Boom.
That's all it takes.
Yeah, well, we so need you. And thank you so much for sharing that expertise.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy with Summer Goralik, and we are so excited to have her here. She is a real estate compliance consultant and expert, and she's here to share with us the top 10 mistakes that brokers can make, even if they don't know they're making a mistake, but they should. And because the Department of Real Estate has actually provided us with certain guidelines, actually, to how to run business. And it's gotten a little crazy, especially with what's going on right now. But one of them is prohibited activities. And Summer, would you share with us what that means? What's a prohibited activity?
So this tip is kind of not what it seems. Now, of course, as a broker, you're telling your agents you are not allowed to violate the real estate law or, any federal law like RESPA, et cetera. We know all of that. But there are things that a broker might deem as a prohibited activity just within the brokerage. And by identifying those up front, educating agents And then, of course, the broker has to continue to supervise and monitor that. The broker can save themselves a lot of headaches. So one example I often give is property management. Now, it's perfectly legal to perform licensed property management activities. And obviously, there are many brokers that do that. But some brokers don't want to mess around with property management in their firm. They don't want to get into the world of trust fund handling. That's just not their thing. So you have to communicate that to your agents. You have to say up front, look, there are going to be no property management activities conducted under the brokerage. And the reason I bring this up is when I was at the DRE investigating complaints, there were so many agents who were doing this as a side business. They didn't know that that was considered, a licensed activity. I'm not sure why, but they didn't realize that. And then all of a sudden they've gotten themselves in hot water.
We just lost you. Hold on a second. We just lost the audio. Hang on.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. What happened?
Oh, sorry. I have no idea.
Okay. Well, we've got all of our bars. So, John, I'm just going to start over with prohibited activities, if that's all right.
All right, Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy with Realty Times Women in Business, Women in Real Estate. And today our guest is Summer Goralik. And she's telling us all about the way we can get in trouble with prohibited activities as a former investigator for the DRE and now as a real estate compliance consultant expert. And we just were discussing about unlicensed assistants and advertising and other issues with team names and fictitious business names. I mean, there's plenty of ways to get in trouble, but prohibited activities, that's a little bit unusual. Tell us about what you've seen with your experience as a consultant in this particular vertical.
So when I say prohibited activities, it's not what you think I mean. So of course there are prohibited activities as defined by the law. The broker is going to tell their sales force, look, you cannot violate any state law, local law, federal law like RESPA. That seems like a given. That's kind of easy. We all know that. But what about the activities that may be legal, but a broker does not want performed underneath the brokerage license? And one example that comes up time and time again for me, both as a former Department of Real Estate investigator and now as a consultant, is property management. Property management is completely legal, but some brokers don't want to go down that road. They don't want to handle trust funds. They just don't want to take on the extra liability. So if that is the case, which is often the case, the broker has to communicate that to the agents. They have to have policies and procedures. Maybe their independent contractors agreement indicates that there will be no property management conducted under the license. The truth is, when I used to work at the DRE, I investigated so many complaints against agents who were running property management businesses outside the scope of their brokerage. And they got in big trouble, not just with DRE, but also with their employing brokerage.
Well, that's interesting because I don't think a lot of brokers even know that. And if they did know that, what are some of the repercussions that can happen if somebody gets hurt on a property? Tell us about where are the gotchas and something like that. Give us an example.
Well, it really has to do with trust funds. So if an agent is running this type of business on the side, they're taking a rent check from a tenant, they're giving it to the owner, they're reconciling their bank account, which I can guarantee is not a trust account and wasn't set up as a trust account. That is a serious violation of the trust fund handling laws. And the fact that the broker was not involved, was not the owner of the trust account, was not supervising, and maybe should have known, should have had policies and procedures to this effect, the broker could easily lose their license.
Well, these are great pointers and tips. And you said we can go to the website for the Department of Real Estate to get some of the do's and don'ts.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, if you just type in property management or unlicensed activity, or actually a really good read if you want to fall asleep quickly, would be the enforcement actions on DRE's website. They're very instructive and educational.
Well, thank you so much for that insight, and I hope you'll join us again.
Thanks, Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy, and we're still here with Summer Goralik. She is a real estate compliance consultant and expert. She's done so much for instructors in Escrow Training Institute and an investigator for 6 years, so she knows where we can get in trouble. And one of the 10 was a transaction conversation log. Now, long before there was MLSs and books and whatever, all we had was paper and pencil. What does that mean today in today's market, Summer, so we don't get ourselves in trouble? And what, as a broker manager, can we demand, insist on, or regulate on this particular action of a mistake that we can make that would foster a compliance infraction?
So the transaction or conversation log, it's an oldie but goodie. Sometimes I get laughed out of the room, but it's an old school practice that still has tremendous value in the real estate industry. And so what do I mean? Any transaction that's conducted, a broker should require that the agent write down or keep a log on their computer. I don't care if it's digital, hard copy, whatever you want to do, just get the details recorded. What happened in that transaction? Were there any significant events? When were documents provided? When were copies? Material information. Write it all down and capture it. Why? Because when the Department of Real Estate receives a complaint about a transaction, which was most likely filed by a consumer, a party to that transaction, they're going to ask the broker for a detailed chronological summary of that file. And guess what? DRE can go back 3 years. So how do you remember something that happened 3 years ago? And if you have 3,000 agents, well, you certainly are not going to have any real knowledge about that file if you're the broker. So have agents write it down, retain it, you have it. And when the DRE does come along asking, you're going to look pretty good because you're going to know exactly what happened in that transaction. You're going to have a really compliant paper trail.
Well, you say it's an oldie but a goodie, but in fact, with all the client relationship management we have now, and you said it could happen 3 years ago, we can hardly remember what we did 3 days ago. So you're absolutely right. If we've got a checklist in place, and if the broker management provides at least a template so that we're covered, because at the end of the day, it's the broker who gets in trouble. Would that be accurate?
And it's not just a checklist, Terry. It's like if something were bad to have happened on a file, that broker would be wise to have the agent record what steps were taken. What was the broker's course of action in case it sees, a courtroom or, the DRE's office. Yes.
And having some of the committees for the commissions, I just want to tell you, you just want to make sure you're never there. Okay. Thank you, Summer, for joining us. I'm sure you'll join us again for another tip on the 10 biggest mistakes brokers can make with prioritizing themselves for the right kind of compliance.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy with Women in Business, Women in Real Estate on Realty Times. I'm with Summer Goralik, and she is here to tell us, as a compliance consultant expert in real estate, how we can get in trouble or stay out of trouble with compliance with the Department of Real Estate. And one of the biggest issues is disclosure. And I know because state to state, the disclosure forms are enormous or short or non-existent. So tell us what is important about protecting ourselves with disclosures.
So obviously it's all about disclosure. Having a broker instill in their agents that any material knowledge has to be disclosed, that, it's a no-brainer. We all know this, and we know this is how lawsuits happen. This is how complaints get filed with the Department of Real Estate. But there are some common denominators that I have found, both having worked at the DRE and as a compliant consultant for the last few years. And that is, if you have agents wearing multiple hats on a transaction, so if I'm playing seller, I'm playing broker at the same time, or something else, I'm wearing 2 hats. If you're not disclosing all of those hats and disclosing those roles, I have found that this is a recipe for disaster. And even if a problem develops on a transaction that had nothing to do with the fact that the agent was wearing multiple hats or basically performing multiple functions, it still will come back to bite you if that information is not disclosed. Another example that I see in the world of disclosure is avoiding secret profit. So anytime an agent or broker is earning a commission or receiving some sort of compensation, that should be disclosed to the parties. We see this a lot in property management, where perhaps the brokerage owns an affiliated vendor that's servicing the property, and the broker is maybe marking up some of those costs, earning profit off those costs, and then that doesn't get disclosed to the principal. This is actually a big one, and Department of Real Estate put out a real estate bulletin a few months, or it might have been a few quarters ago, that talks about secret profit. highly suggest a broker read that, because it's a lot of common things that happen that you wouldn't necessarily know.
Or even bonuses in a transaction. Again, we just don't necessarily as brokers can't assume that our agents understand what the violations are, even though they're licensed and they've gone through the testing. It's one of those things that reminders are a good thing. So would you recommend that brokers review some of these mistakes that are possible at different meetings during the course of a year? Oh, we lost it again. Okay. Are we back? Hold on.
Do you hear me, Terry?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear the last thing you said. I didn't know if you came back to me at all.
Okay, John, we're at 43 minutes and 3 seconds, and I'm just going to do the wrap on this. We're on disclosure. So, Summer, it makes sense for a broker to review a couple of these infractions that can happen at office meetings or in huddles so that they can avoid the issues with complaints or infractions with the DRA. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's all about talking, having conversations with your agents, education. If they know the information up front, it hopefully will not be a problem down the line.
Thanks for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again for another tip from Summer, who's an expert at how we can get in trouble or stay out of trouble with compliance. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Murphy with Women in Business, Women in Real Estate, and our guest today is Summer Goralik, and she is an expert at real estate compliance, and she's a consultant and an expert with what we need to know so we don't get in trouble as brokers and broker managers. And one of the top 10 mistakes is broker supervision. And I want you to tell us a little bit about how, as broker managers or broker leaders, we can keep those policies and procedures that kind of go away after we've taken the test, so that we are always compliant.
So a real estate broker under the real estate law is responsible for reviewing, overseeing, inspecting, managing real estate transaction files, broker controlled escrow files, property management activity, advertising, trust fund handling, file storage, making sure their agents are aware of anti-discrimination laws. There are so many areas. It's enforced under Regulation 2725 of the Commissioner's Regulation. If you're a responsible broker out there and you have not read that regulation, please go run and read it. It might be the only law you read, but who cares? It's an important one. But essentially, the broker is the one where the buck stops with the broker, quite frankly. And you have to have a system in place to tackle the review and supervision and monitoring of compliance in all of those areas that I described. A broker can safely lean on other licensed agents and brokers to do this, to help them with this duty, but they cannot relinquish overall responsibility. I remember when I used to investigate these complaints at the DRE, I would ask the broker in an interview, I'd say, okay, do you review real estate files? And they would say no. Some would say no to me. And I'd say, all right, well, tell me how you're getting the work done. If you have 5 agents, you better be doing the work. If you have 5,000, then yeah, you're going to have a more complicated system in place to get the job done. But the bottom line is, be the gatekeeper of compliance, because if anything happens, unfortunately, that real liability does rest with the broker.
And so what do you think is the number one way that they can do that? I mean, if you have, like you said, 100 transactions a month, do you hire an outside person who's familiar? I mean, what would be a remedy if I was watching this and I'd say, my goodness, I can't look at all those transactions. I mean, there's so many nuances. What can I do?
Well, actually, legally, there's only really one thing you can do to safely delegate some of that responsibility to others. And that would be other licensed agents and brokers within the firm. You could delegate some of that review, some of that oversight and supervision to those people, but you have to have policies and procedures. What are those agents and brokers going to be doing, right? How are you going to make sure that they're reviewing the files the way you would be reviewing the files? So you do have to have a very systematic method of review, but you can lean on licensed people within your firm to do that. I would certainly spell that out in a contract if I was delegating some of that responsibility. I'd hate to delegate that to someone and they would say at the 11th hour, I was never supposed to do that. So write that down, delegate it in writing, and make sure you have a system to oversee what they're doing. Spot check. It's all about spot checking when you're a responsible broker. But if you do this enough, your system will become, more and more fluid, and you can get the job done.
Well, it is clear that we need you, and I'm hoping you'll join us again, because as things progress and as we have nuances that come across with new virtual kinds of presentations and whatever, there's going to be a need for there to be more tightened legislation or more directives. And there's obviously so many ways we're going to need you, especially as we go forward with some of the changes that are happening now with virtual presentations. If I wanted to hire you as a consultant or just to speak with you or have you speak at my event, how would I reach you?
Well, you could email me, summer@expertdrecompliance.com, and that's also my website, expertdrecompliance.com.
And we'll be looking for some articles that you've got written. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll join us again soon.
Oh, thank you so much.